Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. We're wading into some murky waters today, exploring the latest cybersecurity breaches and vulnerabilities. We've got a pretty diverse stack of sources for you today.
Yeah, we got the usual security blogs and news sites, of course.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Those are always a good starting point. But
Yeah.
we've got some interesting stuff, too.
We also dug into some tech journals and even took a peek at how those big Fortune 500 companies are doing on their cybersecurity report cards.
Oh, those are always interesting.
You never know what you're going to find in those.
Exactly. All right, so speaking of wild stuff, let's kick things off with, well...
What do you think? Bitcoin ATMs.
Yeah, Bitcoin ATMs. You might not think they're a big deal, but trust me, this breach shows just how widespread the impact can be. So we have Byte Federal, this U.S. Bitcoin ATM operator. They got hit hard, like really hard.
Yeah, they did.
Data on something like 58,000 customers.
Woof.
It's huge. Hackers, they exploited a vulnerability, basically a backdoor, in their GitLab system and got access to their server.
And they didn't just grab a little bit of data.
No, they didn't.
They walked away with everything. Names, birth dates, you name it.
Even government IDs and social security numbers.
What?
I mean, talk about a goldmine for identity thieves.
It's a nightmare.
Right. I mean, not just for stealing your identity, but think about targeted attacks, too.
Yeah.
If a criminal knows where you
Like a
live,
physical address.
your transaction history, has your photo,
Phishing?
that takes phishing
To a whole new level.
to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Byte Federal, they're saying they've
They beefed up security.
beefed up security, reset accounts, the whole 9 yards.
They say they're doing everything they can to make things right.
Right. But
Yeah.
the question remains, are Bitcoin ATMs just inherently more vulnerable?
That's a great question. And frankly, it's one anyone using these services should be asking.
Right. Like, is it the technology or the environment around it?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest.
Yeah.
These Bitcoin ATMs, they sometimes operate in this gray area, when it comes to regulations.
Yeah, definitely.
And that can be a magnet for shady characters.
It definitely does attract them.
And then you have the whole allure of those quick and anonymous transactions.
Yeah.
And that can lead some users to, well, let's just say security isn't always top of mind.
Not their top priority.
Not at all.
Right. So I guess the big takeaway here is
Be careful out there.
be careful out there. If you're going to play in the crypto world,
Absolutely.
you got to understand the risks.
You need to protect yourself.
Right. Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, all that good stuff.
Those are your digital bodyguards, for sure.
Definitely. Don't let that excitement of new technology, overshadow the need for good security.
Oh, that's so true.
Basics. All right. So from Bitcoin, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about education. Specifically, Rutherford County Schools in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah. This one is a tough one.
Yeah, it is, because they got hit by the Rosetta ransomware gang and,
They're holding employee data hostage
hostage.
for a cool $2 million in Bitcoin.
Ouch. 2 million.
That's
A lot of Bitcoin.
It's a lot of anything. So
Yeah.
This attack,
It messed with everything.
it messed with exams, it messed with
I
assignments.
think they had to rely on backups to restore everything.
Schools, are they just sitting ducks for this kind of attack? You hear about it all the time.
It's a huge problem. And honestly, I think it goes beyond just budget constraints.
Well, yeah, they don't always have the money for top-notch cybersecurity. That's true.
Right. But it's more than that. There is often a lack of awareness, lack of specialized staff.
Yeah, right.
I mean, think about it. Their focus is on educating students,
Right. Not fighting hackers.
not on fending off cyber criminals.
Right. And in this case, the attack had real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
Big-time disruption.
Beyond just the ransom itself, you've got to consider the lost instructional time,
Yeah.
the potential for compromised student data.
Yeah.
It erodes trust in the school system.
Yeah,
And all that costs money, too, in a way.
it really does.
Okay, so from schools, let's move on to something even more essential. Water. A U.S. subsidiary of Corrido Water Industries.
Global water treatment company.
Global company. Yeah, they're dealing with the fallout from a cyber attack.
Yeah, this one locked up a lot of their data.
Hackers got into those servers.
Potentially accessed customer info, business contacts, even purchasing data.
The water industry, it seems like they're increasingly in the crosshairs
Yeah,
of cyber criminals.
and with good reason.
Yeah, think about it. Disrupting the water supply.
Or even worse,
Yeah.
contaminating water sources.
That's...
That could be catastrophic.
That's terrifying. It really makes you think about how vulnerable critical infrastructure is.
It's a wake-up call for sure. Korea's doing everything they can to contain the breach.
Yeah, they put out warnings about potential payment fraud attempts.
Right, trying to stay ahead of it.
But still, this just really underscores the need for serious cybersecurity across the whole water sector.
The whole sector needs to step up their game.
Absolutely. All right, speaking of insidious threats, you ready to talk about Remco's RAT malware?
Ugh, RATs. They're like the cockroaches of malware.
Oh, really? Why do you say that?
Sneaky, persistent, and almost impossible to get rid of.
This sounds lovely. So this Remco's RAT uses phishing emails, right?
Yeah, phishing emails and malicious attachments.
To basically hijack systems.
Espionage and data theft are their main goals.
And McAfee Labs found some variants that are using some pretty sneaky tactics.
Right. Obfuscation and exploiting vulnerabilities to stay under the radar.
So obfuscation.
Basically, they're disguising their code.
Oh, so it's harder for security software to spot it.
Exactly. It's like a master criminal changing their appearance to avoid detection.
So if you get an email that seems a little off,
Be very cautious.
what are some red flags? Like, how do you spot it?
Well, always be wary of emails from senders you don't recognize,
Yeah.
especially those with attachments. If the content seems strange or out of character for the sender, that's a huge red flag.
Okay. So,
And whatever you do, don't click on any links or open attachments unless you are absolutely certain they're legitimate.
yeah, it's amazing how often these attacks rely on human error.
Human error is often the weakest link, unfortunately.
But don't worry, there are things you can do
Of course.
to protect yourself. Keep your software updated, use a good antivirus.
And most importantly, be cautious about what you click on.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's talk software development for a minute. This next story really highlights the importance of supply chain security.
Definitely a hot topic these days.
So we have this malicious NPM package
Disguised as a legitimate one.
using typo-squatting.
Oh, that's a nasty trick.
It is. So tell everybody what typo-squatting is.
So basically, attackers exploit our tendency to make typos, right?
Like, I'll do it.
They create packages with names very similar to popular ones, hoping you'll accidentally install their malicious code.
Oh, wow. So you think you're getting the right thing?
And bam, you've been hit.
Yeah, and in this case, this sneaky package allowed for real-time data theft.
Remote command execution, even keystroke logging.
It's scary. So what can developers do? I mean, they're usually pretty tech-savvy.
They are, but they can still fall victim.
So how do they avoid this?
First and foremost, double-check the package name before you install anything.
Okay, yeah.
One letter can make a world of difference.
Wow.
Also, pay attention to the package's download count and its reputation. If anything seems off, trust your gut and do some research.
Good advice. It's a good reminder that nobody is immune to these attacks.
Yeah.
All right, shifting gears again, we're heading to Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Interesting location.
The city is shelling out over $461,000 for cybersecurity upgrades.
Wow, that's a significant investment.
It is, after they got hit by a cyber attack that involved unauthorized access and a ransom demand. Big question here.
Yeah, how do organizations justify these big cybersecurity expenses?
Especially when budgets are tight.
It's a challenge for a lot of organizations.
Because it's often seen as a cost, not an investment.
Right, but the reality is a cyber attack can be way more costly in the long run,
Yeah.
both financially and reputationally.
It's like insurance, right? You hope you never have to use it.
But you're sure glad you have it when you do.
Right. Okay, our next story is all about the importance of basic security hygiene. Over 300,000 Prometheus servers and node exporter instances are publicly exposed, leaking sensitive data. Why?
Missing authentication.
It's just that simple.
Sometimes the simplest oversights can have the biggest consequences.
Right, so they're focused on all these complex security solutions.
And forgetting the basics.
Yeah.
Like enabling multi-factor authentication and limiting public access to sensitive systems.
Okay, so what are the simple, crucial steps people are missing?
Well, enable multi-factor authentication wherever you can.
Okay, makes sense.
It's an extra layer of security. Requires multiple forms of verification.
Like a password and a code sent to your phone.
Exactly. Makes it much harder for attackers to get in.
So simple, yet so effective.
Absolutely. And of course, regularly update your software and operating systems.
Yeah, those updates often include security patches.
Right. Fixing known vulnerabilities.
And be careful about what info you share publicly.
And who has access to your sensitive data.
All good advice. Seems like basic security hygiene is that front line of defense.
It really is. Think of it like brushing your teeth.
Okay,
You do it every day to prevent problems down the line. Security is no different.
great analogy. All right, let's talk about Apache Struts 2. It's a popular Java web application framework,
Yeah, I know it.
and it's got a critical vulnerability.
Could allow for remote code execution.
And this is a big deal because this same vulnerability,
Was exploited in the Equifax breach back in 2017.
that's crazy.
It really highlights the importance of timely patching.
Yeah, so why is patching so often delayed or neglected?
Well, sometimes organizations just aren't aware of the vulnerability.
Right.
Or they lack the resources or expertise to apply the patch.
Okay.
Other times, they're worried about compatibility issues or downtime.
So they're putting it off.
But the truth is, the risks of not patching far outweigh the inconvenience of doing it.
It's like leaving your front door unlocked, just inviting trouble.
Exactly. And Equifax is a perfect example of how bad things can get when you don't patch promptly.
Definitely a lesson learned the hard way. So patch now, panic later, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh,
All right, so this next one is a little lighter.
good. I need a break from the doom and gloom.
Yeah, me too. So a vulnerability in Facebook Messenger for iOS allowed group calls to be disrupted.
Invalid emoji reactions.
Emoji reactions. Really?
Sounds silly, but it highlights how seemingly innocuous things can have security implications.
So how do developers account for these weird attack vectors?
It all comes down to thorough testing and a security-first mindset.
Makes sense.
Developers need to consider every possible input, even the unlikely ones.
Right, and think about how everything interacts.
Because you never know what a clever attacker might exploit. Okay, so this next story is a little more serious again. Cyber News found that 84% of Fortune 500 companies scored a D or worse for their cybersecurity efforts.
Oof, that's not a good look.
Not at all. So why are so many big companies failing at this?
Well, for one, modern IT environments are incredibly complex.
Yeah, these companies have huge networks.
Countless systems and applications.
Trying to secure all that must be a nightmare.
It's like trying to herd 1,000 cats.
Right. And then you have the shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals.
There simply aren't enough qualified people to fill all the open jobs.
And if cybersecurity isn't a priority for the higher-ups,
It's not going to be a priority for the company as a whole.
it's a recipe for disaster.
Hmm.
All right, last one for this part of our deep dive, hardware security. An HT report found that 79% of IT security leaders admit to major gaps in their knowledge about hardware and firmware security.
That's concerning.
Very concerning. Why is hardware security so often overlooked?
I think people assume hardware is inherently more secure than software, which is just not true. And it's often seen as more complex and technical, which can be intimidating.
So what can organizations do to improve their hardware security?
Acknowledge that it's just as important as software security.
Right.
Invest in training, build expertise, and work closely with hardware vendors to make sure security is baked in from the start.
It's about taking a proactive approach.
Exactly. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially in cybersecurity.
Couldn't agree more. All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Bitcoin, schools, water, RATs, type of squatting, you name it. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, so we all need to stay vigilant.
Absolutely.
Stay informed.
And stay safe.
We'll be back with part 2 of this deep dive, so stay tuned for more insights and analysis.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, it's true. Hardware often gets overlooked, but it's a critical part of the security puzzle.
For sure. Now, remember that report we mentioned earlier
Mm-hmm.
about Fortune 500 companies and their, well, not so stellar cybersecurity grades?
Oh, yeah, those were pretty rough.
84% scoring a D or worse. I mean, yikes. You'd think those big companies with all their resources would be cybersecurity rock stars.
You would think, wouldn't you?
Right. So what gives? Why are they failing so badly?
Well, it's complicated, but I think it boils down to a few things. One, those IT environments are just massive, so many systems and applications.
Yeah, trying to secure all that must be a nightmare.
It's a logistical challenge.
Right. And then there's the shortage of cybersecurity talent, right?
A huge problem. Not enough qualified people to fill all those jobs.
And then what about the leadership?
Ah, yes, the human factor. If cybersecurity isn't a priority for the folks at the top.
It's going to trickle down, or not trickle down, I guess.
Exactly. If it's seen as just an IT problem, not a business risk, it's going to get neglected.
And that's when those big breaches happen.
It's a recipe for disaster.
For sure. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Apache Struts 2 again, that Java web application framework.
Yeah, the one with the critical vulnerability.
Yeah, the one that could allow for remote code execution. And get this, it's the same vulnerability that was exploited in the Equifax breach.
Back in 2017.
2017, I mean, come on. It
Yeah.
just shows how important patching is.
It's crucial and yet so often overlooked.
Why is that? Why are organizations so slow to patch?
Sometimes they're just not aware of the vulnerability.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes they don't have the resources to do it properly.
Or they're worried about downtime, right?
Exactly. But the truth is, the risk of not patching is far greater than the inconvenience of doing it.
Equifax learned that the hard way.
You sure did.
It's a costly lesson.
Duh.
So yeah, patch now, panic later.
Yeah.
All right, let's lighten things up a bit. Remember that Facebook Messenger vulnerability? The one with the emoji reactions?
Oh, yeah, that was a fun one.
So bizarre. But it just goes to show you never know what a clever attacker might exploit.
Absolutely. It's all about thinking outside the box.
So as a developer, how do you account for those weird attack vectors?
It's all about a security-first mindset, considering security at every stage of development, not just at the end.
Baking it into the DNA of the software.
Exactly. Thorough testing is crucial too. Testing for those unexpected inputs.
Makes sense. Always be learning, always be adapting.
The threat landscape is constantly evolving. Got to stay ahead of the game.
Okay, let's talk hardware security again. Remember that HP report? 79% of IT security leaders admitting to knowledge gaps in hardware and firmware security.
That's a big red flag.
It is. Why is there such a disconnect between hardware and software security?
I think hardware security is often seen as more complex, more technical.
Okay.
And there's this myth that hardware is just inherently secure.
Right, which we know isn't true.
Not at all. And unfortunately, there's often a lack of training and resources dedicated to hardware security.
So what's the solution? How do organizations address this?
First, they need to acknowledge that hardware security is just as important as software security.
Yeah, equal foot.
They need to invest in training, build up expertise, and work closely with those hardware vendors to ensure security is built in from the start.
Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk passwords. I know they're kind of boring, but so important.
The gateway to your digital life.
So many people still use weak passwords or reuse the same password everywhere.
It's like using the same key for your house, your car, and your office. Not a good idea.
So any tips for creating strong, memorable passwords?
Avoid using obvious stuff like your name, birthday, pet's name. Go for a longer password, mix of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, symbols.
That sounds like a jumbled mess I'd never remember.
It doesn't have to be. Try a passphrase, a series of words that are easy for you to remember but hard for others to guess.
Like, I love coffee and long walks on the beach.
Exactly. Or you can use a password manager, a program that stores and encrypts all your passwords.
So you only have to remember one master password.
Yep. Makes life a lot easier.
Okay, so strong passwords are a must. Use a mix of characters, create passphrases, and maybe try a password manager.
And never reuse passwords across multiple accounts.
Good point. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. Well, that's it for this part of our deep dive. Lots of ground covered today. We'll be back for the final part soon with even more cybersecurity insights and analysis. Stay tuned. All right. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're wrapping up our cybersecurity roundup with a few more stories that'll really give you a sense of just how, diverse these threats can be.
Yeah, no kidding. It's amazing how vulnerabilities pop up in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. Okay, so let's revisit that Facebook Messenger vulnerability for a second. The one with the emoji reactions causing all the chaos.
Ah, yes, the emoji of doom.
Emoji of doom. It just shows you any feature can have security implications.
Even the fun ones.
Right. It makes you wonder what other hidden vulnerabilities are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Oh, I'm sure there are plenty.
Yeah.
It's a constant back and forth between security researchers and the attackers.
Yeah, a never-ending game of cat and mouse.
Exactly. As soon as you patch one hole, another one pops up.
All right, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about big businesses. Remember that Cyber News report? The one that found 84% of Fortune 500 companies scored a D or worse for their cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah, that was a real eye-opener.
Yeah, pretty shocking. I mean, you'd think these giant companies would be at the top of their game.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the reality is a lot of them are struggling.
So why is that? Why are so many failing?
Well, part of it is the complexity of their IT environments. These companies have massive networks, so many systems and applications to manage.
It must be a nightmare trying to keep all of that secure.
It's a huge challenge, for sure. And then you have the shortage of cybersecurity professionals.
Oh, yeah. There are just not enough qualified people to fill all those jobs.
It's a real problem. And then there's the whole issue of leadership and culture.
Yeah, if cybersecurity isn't a top priority for the executives, it's not going to be a priority for the company.
Exactly. If it's seen as an IT problem and not a business risk,
Right.
well, then it's going to be neglected.
And that's a recipe for disaster.
A major disaster.
Okay, let's move on. This next story is a good reminder that you need to stay vigilant even when you're doing something routine. We had this malicious NPM package, disguised as a legit one using typo-squatting.
Ah, yes, typo-squatting. A classic trick.
So for those who don't know, what is typo-squatting?
It's where attackers exploit our tendency to, well, make typos.
We all do it.
They create packages with names that are almost identical to popular ones, hoping you'll slip up and accidentally install their malicious code.
So you think you're getting the right thing, and bam.
You've been hit.
Wow, that's sneaky.
It is. So developers really need to be careful. Double-check those package names before installing anything.
Yeah, even one letter can make a world of difference.
Absolutely.
All right, and for our last story today, let's talk about Apache Struts 2 again. That Java web application framework we mentioned earlier.
The one with the critical vulnerability?
The one that could allow for remote code execution. And this is a big deal because it's the same vulnerability that was exploited in the Equifax breach.
Back in 2017?
2017. I mean, seriously. The same vulnerability is still out there causing problems.
It's a testament to how often patching gets neglected.
It's crazy. Why wouldn't companies just patch these things right away?
Well, sometimes they don't know about the vulnerability.
Okay.
Sometimes they don't have the resources to do it.
Makes sense.
And sometimes they're worried about downtime or compatibility issues.
So they just put it off, hoping it'll go away.
It's like ignoring a leaky faucet.
Yeah, and hoping it won't cause a flood.
Exactly. But eventually it's going to catch up with you. And when it does, it can be a major disaster, like in the case of Equifax.
Definitely a lesson learned the hard way. All right, well, I guess the big takeaway here is that basic security hygiene is absolutely essential.
Couldn't agree more. It's like brushing your teeth. You got to do it regularly.
Yeah, it's those simple things that can make a big difference.
Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, timely patching, all that good stuff.
It's like locking your doors and windows.
And being aware of your surroundings.
Exactly. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We all need to do our part.
And stay informed.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our cybersecurity roundup for this week. We've covered a lot of ground, from sneaky emojis to the importance of patching. The threat landscape is constantly changing, so stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe out there.
Thanks for having me. This was a great discussion.
Thanks for joining us.